Totally Football Show. Today, Champions League. Barcelona, Lamine, just 17, and the new dream team. Inter with Denzel, sharper than a pencil. We look back on a 3-3 for all. Game of the season. Meanwhile, Tuesday's game at the Emirates, Arsenal's big guns disappoint, and that was just the pre-game banner. Thrills, free kick drills, and Dembele aches on the way. Plus, Premier League, shuffling corpse of the top flight season launches onwards, while the Football League prepares its big finale. We've got everything you need to know coming up on this Totally Football Show. It's Thursday, the 1st of May. Hi, listener. Joining us today, we've got Tom Williams. All right, Tom.
Hello, James.
Back from Paris.
Back from Paris.
Woof. We're talking about Paris a bit.
But I suspect we probably will be.
Charlie Eccleshare's with us.
Hello.
But not for long. Yeah.
I think so.
Charlie's on a deadline list. That's what I'm referring to.
I don't think
And
I noticed.
Jack Lang. Hi, Jack.
Hi, James.
Looking well.
Thanks.
Excellent.
You too.
Thank you so much. We're going to be hearing from Pol Ballus very, very shortly. There's Premier League action and there's the Champions League semi-final games. But did anyone happen to catch any of that? Wednesday's game at all?
Yes,
Couple of minutes.
just a bit. Just
Right.
dipped in.
Game of the season, would you say?
It's up there. It is up there. I'd have to think about all the many tens and tens of games I've
Don't
watched.
do that.
But
Just
it's
say yes, I
top
think.
3, I'm going to say,
Yeah.
at least.
I think it had all the ingredients in that there was, an element of comedic defending, but there was that sense that anything could happen and would, kind of from start to finish.
And a good proportion of the goals being wonder goals,
Yeah.
which was quite satisfying.
Yeah, certainly was. Certainly was. Charlie, I believe you were at the game on Tuesday.
I was, which was not quite so entertaining.
No, although
But interesting. A higher XG in that game combined than in the Barcelona game. Yeah.
Arsenal PSG had a higher combined XG than the madness at Montjuic.
But
According to the XG philosophy, yes.
curiously, about half of Arsenal's XG in that game came from that Gabriel Martinelli chance in the first half where Saka crosses the ball to the back post. He slides in. Like an extremely difficult, if not impossible chance coming at it from the direction that he was coming at it from. But in the eyes of the XG machine, the guy's less than 6 yards out with an open goal, 0.83. That was the best quality chance of the game. So is XG all it's cracked up to be? I'm asking the question.
Well, actually, I mean, XG heads will tell you that individual games isn't what it should be used for. So maybe that's a good example of it. Yeah.
In what way?
Well, it's there for kind of wider trends because in individual games, you're going to have outliers, like Tom says.
I see.
So it's used to say over a season or over a long period rather than just in one game where, because something like that could skew it. Whereas something that might be a really good chance, a player just doesn't even make contact with the ball, that's 0.00.
Yeah, there are those who really don't give any stock to XG numbers, preferring things like scores. You do raise an interesting question, Tom. Who is it? Who are the shadowy figures who decide what the XG on a chance is? By what metric?
It's the machines, isn't it?
Is it a machine?
Well,
I think they just hook Duncan up to like an intravenous.
Right.
like in Minority Report, he's just in like a pool with a load of other nerds.
Right.
Just trembling.
All the boffins trembling together.
What an image.
This has become quite playground, actually.
Already, and we're less than 5 minutes in.
5 minutes in. Let's get into the proper stuff. Barcelona 3 Inter 3 was arguably the game of this season, and best for many, according to some. Pol Ballus was actually there, and he joins us now. Pol, how are you?
I'm fine. Even better after the game I witnessed last night.
Yeah. How's the blackout going? How close was this game to not actually taking place, actually?
I would say not that close, because the blackout was pretty much solved after a day, which was on Tuesday. So basically, it all happened on Monday, and I would say that after 24 hours, the majority of the country was back in normal service. But yeah, still it's like the chit chat around the country, and like you go to do the groceries and everything.
Of course, 1 or 2 blackouts perhaps at the back for Barca Wednesday night. They've had some incredible games just of late. The 4-4 with Atletico in the Copa. Then last weekend, the 3-2 extra time game with Real in the Copa del Rey final. But this game, Pol, how was this one?
I think that this will rank among the best ones of Barcelona this season, which is quite a statement given the examples that we've had. I also think that it will rank among the best in the Champions League this season, which is also a big statement. But yeah, that's what Barcelona is. Barcelona, I wrote a piece this morning at The Athletic saying that Barcelona are basically the most fun team to watch in the world. That doesn't mean the best. That doesn't mean the greatest. But they are the biggest entertainers in European football this season. That comes thanks to the approach that Hansi Flick has given to this team, which has this suicidal high line, this relentless counter press, which basically just opened the games, wide open, and it gives the game script two options. Either Barcelona suffocates you, or either the opposition find a way through that they're pressing, and that's not an open goal, but an open side of the pitch just to run forward and try to capitalize on Barcelona, basically. And that's what the game against Inter was, just a relentless back and forth game of football.
It was a bit from both boxes, really, and featuring, you call them the most entertaining team in the world, possibly the most entertaining player in the world to watch right now, Lamine Yamal, barely old enough for driving lessons, and those comparisons, they're only going to grow. Yeah,
the only one. I mean, I don't want to be the one that feels it and that puts more gas into it, but just watching the game last night, it just reminded me. Do you remember that Lionel Messi Stamford Bridge game against Asier del Horno? So basically, just the vibes were just the same. Just a teenager that no one can do anything to stop him. Messi seemed a bit more shy and I don't look like a proper footballer, but Lamine Yamal, he's made for the stage. He was asking for the ball. He was saying, okay, I'm going to do this. He was taking on defenders. And he was just doing things that you could even imagine. It was outstanding to see in a moment where Barcelona were a bit off because they were 2-0 down. He just put the team back on his shoulders and he just carried the whole team in the toughest moment, which is what you ask to veteran players who's been through it all, not to 17-year-olds, but here we are. Lamine Yamal, a talent that you see once every 50 years, as Simone Inzaghi said after the game.
At that moment when he approaches 5 Inter players and there's no way through. It's a cage of white shirts.
Amazing, yeah. What Inter did, doubling up on him, is a good idea in theory. But when the second player is Henrik Mkhitaryan, who has got all the kind of defensive solidity of like a blancmange, it just wasn't enough. So but by the time Lamela had scored that goal and was increasingly influential.
Well, just after that then, like a minute later, he has that where he takes DiMarco out completely, the hot dog routine. And then it's only fingertips from Sommer that puts it onto the bar. Yeah. He's the youngest scorer in Champions League semi-final history, playing his 100th game last night. A lot of people concerned about the workload that's already been put into those legs. And there was even a doubt that he might be taking part last night, Paul.
Yeah, because when Barcelona were just warming up, he left to warm up a bit earlier than like it was usual. He walked down back to the dressing room with the physiotherapist of the team. When he stepped into the pitch, we saw that he was dressed up to play the game. We were a bit concerned about if he was in full fitness, but after the game, he revealed that during warm-up, he felt something weird while he was shooting, but then he decided to go inside to warm up a little bit more on this specific area. And then just the physiotherapist and the doctors checked. He appeared to be okay, and he played the game. And I don't think that he was too harmed, if I'm honest.
So Inzaghi dubbing him a once in a 50 years, once in a half century kind of player. Others, Charlie, say he's not all that.
Do they? I was not suggesting he's not all that. I was just suggesting it veered into kind of a bit much territory. I don't know if that's even, maybe it's just the volume of it, that it was kind of all that was being talked about, which is understandable. Obviously, he is so, he does just take all the oxygen in the room, I suppose. No, don't get me wrong. He is clearly a generational talent. Unbelievably gifted and effective.
If he's going to take the role that Messi used to occupy in discourse, who's going to be his Ronaldo? Is there another 17-year out there, or a Salieri to his Mozart?
Well, if they do, they need to
step it up.
Need to step it up, because we've not heard of them yet.
Well, I think Ronaldo was a little bit behind Messi in his development. I think he's...
Ronaldo was a bit older, wasn't he? And Ronaldo kind of emerged on our screens at an earlier age.
Already there were stats doing the round. Neither of these, Ronaldo nor Messi, had played anything like what Yamal's played at the same age, or obviously got the same kind of output. Messi burst onto the scene when he was younger, but Ronaldo took a little while. He was a slightly, he had loads of potential, but he didn't have the end product at a young age. I mean, that's what's so impressive about Yamal. He has. It's not just the talent and the skills; it's the fact that he can execute at the most important moments as well. I mean, yeah, unbelievable talent.
And it's the variety in his game as well. Like, he can hurt you in so many ways, and something that young attacking players are often criticised for when they're in the early stages of their careers is their decision making. And his decision making is not yet perfect, and it can still develop. But he has so many kind of tools in his footballing toolkit: the outside of the foot cross, the outside of the foot pass, the in-swinging cross, the dribble, going left, going right. And he just seems to use all of those skills really appropriately. He's not trying things that aren't coming off. He has this ability to choose precisely the right skill or the right technique at the right moment every time. And I almost felt sorry for the Inter defenders trying to defend against him, because you can cut off certain options, but he always comes up with a solution.
And he's developed his right foot way quicker than Messi did. Messi obviously became incredibly two-footed and could score with his right foot, but he couldn't necessarily at this age. Whereas what Yamal can do, like you say, Tom, he can go either way. And that does create such a headache. He's not one of the... Messi early on, you could at least just try and shift him onto his right foot. You can't really do that with him. Even yesterday, a couple of times they did that, and he still found the right pass or a dangerous cross.
One thing with Messi, obviously, he had amazing individual skill, but he also had, on his side of the pitch, very well-grooved triangles with Dani Alves, Xavi. I'd like to know from Pol, who watches a lot more of Barcelona than any of us do you see those kind of relationships emerging? Like, is Pedri becoming Yamal's guy? Do you see Koundé as someone who will unlock space for Yamal? How do you see that kind of relationship?
I do think that he has a platform here of players just to keep growing up with. I'm not gonna put Koundé like in Dani Alves levels in terms of offensive production, especially, but he has the likes of Pedri, he has the likes of Frenkie de Jong, he has the likes of Dani Olmo, which might be one of the best players in the world playing between the lines. So I think that he has... I'm not going to compare them with Xavi, with Iniesta, with Villa, with Busquets, but I think it's a decent group of players. One that Lamine Yamal gets along really well, which in the end of the day, that's important too, because they know each other so well. With most of them, they play together in the national team. They know the movements. They know what they like to do. And one of my biggest doubts when you do this Lamine Yamal and Messi comparison is if someone is going to be able to keep up the line of like productivity that Messi was able to do. At some point, Messi was like goal assist. He was just a production machine. I see in Lamine Yamal more of an entertainer, more of a free-flowing guy, a guy that wants to have fun, wants to dribble, wants to do his tricks, but in the same time, I also think that he's a player that the most outstanding thing that he has in his game is the understanding of the whole situation. I think it was you, Tom, that you said that he still has to improve on his decision making, and that's absolutely right. But I think that, for the age he has, it's outstanding. Like, if he has like 3 decisions to make in every move, if he doesn't choose the best, he chooses a great one every single time, and that's really tough to do when you're a teenager. And for me, that's what makes the difference with Lamine Yamal, because he's not a guy who obsessed in the 1-against-1. If he's triple down, he's one that can raise an eye and just spot a free space on the other side of the pitch, and he's able to make that pass. He's happy to add this to his game and to his team in order to make them win, basically.
We should say as well, obviously Messi and Ronaldo are complete outliers. Generally, what happens with football is there's this 500 appearance theory that basically says the vast majority of players, once they hit 500 first team appearances, they go on a fairly steep decline. And you think of guys like Rooney or Fernando Torres, even more recently Raheem Sterling, guys who burst onto the scene 17, 18. By the age of about 26, you could see that they were quite clearly their best years were behind them. That's more normal. So, to expect Yamal to get to kind of Messi, I don't think the question is necessarily can he get to their peaks. I think he probably can, or he certainly looks like it. But to actually sustain that in the way that they were able to, that's totally freakish.
There you go, sucking all the oxygen out of the room again with your Yamal chat, Charlie.
Hating
Inter
on
were
Yamal.
also involved on Wednesday night. And, oh, look, Denzel Dumfries scored 2, assisted another. Thuram's back heel was a stunner, 30 seconds into the game. Dumfries' overhead Second goal was a beaut. They very nearly won the game with a Mkhitaryan goal that was called back for basically
So
a toenail.
tight,
Yeah. And wow, what did you make of Inter? And also, Pol, as a kind of follow-up question, the Barcelona players look pretty despondent, some of them, at the end of the game. What's the mood there following the 3-3?
So basically, I was very impressed by Inter. I know, and we know that he was a side that looked really assembled to be able to punish and to capitalize on Barcelona's suicidal approach that I mentioned earlier. But I think that they were really, really good. The fact that they are a team that, they don't hesitate in like waiting in a low block, and then they have a lot of argument up front just to try to disarm Barcelona's defensive system. So that was impressive. I wouldn't be surprised if Denzel Dumfries is one of the most hated men in Barcelona in the next few weeks, because apart from the display that he showed last night, there's still in the back of the minds of all Barcelona fans what happened a couple of years ago in the Champions League group stage when Barca played Inter, and there was a potential handball from Denzel Dumfries that wasn't given, and that in the end of the day made Barcelona be knocked out at the group stage of the Champions League, which was seen as a failure back then. So Denzel Dumfries has been involved with Barcelona's path in the Champions League quite a few times recently, and that's one of the big points of Barcelona at the moment. They are knackered. They are really tired with the schedule that they've had. I don't think that they can sustain 90 minutes of this flick approach that they would like to do, and you have been seeing that over the last few games. Against Real Madrid in the second half, Real Madrid were much the better team because Barcelona's legs were a bit gone. And against Inter, I would say the same, especially because the first half last night required such a huge shift from Barcelona, such a huge spending of their energies, that the second half, I would say that Inter had the game more like where they wanted to. And that's going to be a risk for the second leg. I would say that it's impossible for Barca fans not to be optimistic and not to trust this group of players after what they've shown, because the most impressive thing that this team has is that they don't back down. They put up a fight. It's really difficult to knock them down. They have done all these remontadas throughout the season. We've mentioned the Copa del Rey game, but if we look like a couple of weeks back, they won a game at home against Celta de Vigo that they were losing 3-1 after 65 minutes in the game. So they have this resilience in them, and you wonder why, like, when you get to these stages, we tend to say that teams need this experience, these veteran players, these just proven guys that have been there, have done that, and that know how to ride the roller coaster of emotions that the Champions League is. But if you look at Barca's lineup last night, there's only one player who was in the Champions League semi-finals before last night, and that was Frankie de Jong. So they don't have experience, but they don't care. They have the mentality, they know what it means to represent Barcelona, and they go with it. And that's what makes them great, and in a way what has created this connection with the fan base and with everyone in Barcelona, which leads the people to feel optimistic through the second leg.
Got a big title race going on. Both teams do indeed, but Barcelona have the Clásico coming up in 10 days straight after the second leg at San Siro. Pol, we'll hear more from you next Tuesday on our Euro show ahead of the game in Milan. Many, many thanks, though, for joining us today.
It's been an absolute pleasure, just as always.
I should say, Inter, a magnificent performance and utterly unexpected given their recent form.
Do you think? I didn't think they were that good.
Why not?
Because
are you one of those people who sees Forest, for example, win a game? Oh, yeah, but they only had 3 shots on target.
Absolutely not. This is not a kind of philosophical thing. I love the sight of a team. The best bit of their play for me was when they were 2-0 up and they were sitting deep, luring Barcelona onto them.
Right.
I love that. I love everything about that. And I normally love this Inter team, but I didn't think they were very good at all.
No, I think they've played better than this. And a couple of, Barella didn't have his best
Barella
game.
was
DiMarco
not
in particular, since he's come back from injury, has not been anything like the same player.
Marcus Thuram, like visibly half fit.
Yeah, but he was half fit.
But
that's what my point was, that after going through that week in which it seemed like their treble hopes were about to disappear completely, losing 3-0 to Milan in the Coppa Italia, then the back-to-back defeats in Serie A, and then a trip to Barcelona when it looked like they were going to get absolutely creamed. I thought it was remarkable for them to
Amazing. Yeah, it's an amazing achievement. But did they play well? Not really.
I thought they did well in the second half because they needed half-time. Half-time came at a really good time for them. It did feel at that point like how I could see at that point it looked like Barca might win 4 or 5-2 or something. They were just absolutely relentless. I think they did well to sort of stem that tide and get it back, because the second half was, as Pol said, I did think it felt less frenetic and a bit more played on Inter's terms. So I think they did well to kind of wrestle, not control, but to at least sort of dampen down that momentum that Barca had.
Weirdly, I thought their best period of play was actually when Barcelona equalised in the second half, the own goal.
Yeah.
And at that point, you're expecting, okay, now Barcelona are going to really make this forward momentum count. And then Inter suddenly started playing football that we know they're capable of, like Dumfries. Yeah, that time when Bisek underlapped and it really mishit his cross, and DiMarco ends up missing at the far post, but there were 2 men in the box. For 10 minutes, Inter were amazing. The passing moves were working. Dumfries nearly got in again. There was also the disallowed goal for offside. That 10-minute chunk, I thought they were sensational. But the rest of the match, I thought they did really well, hanging in there and scoring, but they weren't anywhere near their best. And I think if they play their best in the second leg, Barcelona could have all kinds of problems.
Good Lord. Dumfries and Marcus Thuram, who were both out through that 3-game series of defeats, weren't entirely fit. Maybe they will be better. Barca, will be interesting to see how they line up. Koundé, it looks like, won't be able to play next time around. There is some suggestion that Lewandowski could be back for the second leg. But we'll have more on that in our Euros show, which will be out with you early Tuesday. Next up on this show, with that tie delicately poised, let's move on to the other semi-final, Arsenal-PSG. Charlie, you were there for this blistering first-half performance from the Parisians, who somehow failed to be intimidated by Arsenal unveiling a giant blown-up JPEG of a red cannon, and proceeded to school the home side for a good, 20 minutes?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, it was... a lot's been made about the atmosphere. I think a lot not in good faith. I mean, a lot comes from let's laugh at another team, which, that's football. I mean, I think it's been a bit...
Because of the banner.
Partly because of the banner. Obviously...
Sorry, if you didn't see this, Arsenal had turned down fans' requests to do their own... It's been called a tifo. To do their own kind of display, choreography, whatever you want to call it, and instead insisted on doing their own. When you were there pre-game and you saw the wires ready to unveil this giant display, and then that dropped, what was the reaction in the stadium?
I'll be honest, I think that made minimal difference.
Sure.
I mean, how one feels going into a game counts on things like alcohol consumption, one's own expectations, the weather, tifos. I think televisually maybe make a difference, and maybe to a hardcore group who were wanting to design the flag or feel very strongly on these things. My view personally, and I think for the majority, is they make very little difference. I think what made more of a difference, well, there were a number of factors. I think the atmosphere before the Real Madrid game was this kind of wide-eyed, holy shit, it's Real Madrid. This team were playing Bate Borisov in the Europa League group stages not years ago. That was not long ago. That was terrible. It's Real Madrid. It's Kivior at centre-back. It's Marino up front. Let's just go and enjoy this because let's have some fun. And it was great. I think PSG, there was still obviously a huge amount of excitement, but there was slightly vertiginous feeling of Arsenal might win the Champions League. Are they favourites for this game? It was still a lot of excitement, but it wasn't quite the same as Real Madrid. Throw in, and this might sound mad, the minute silence for the Pope, which was the worst observed minute silence I've ever seen. Honestly, I think people were really thrown by it. No disrespect. I'm not saying no disrespect to the Pope. Wonderful Pope, but the whole vibe before was let's crank up the atmosphere, let's get everyone excited, and then that's a bit of a check. But I think the main thing...
Obviously, you got that in the minute silence, silence began and people started applauding.
It was quiet before it.
Yeah, it was quiet before. Then it started and people started applauding. And then very quickly, the solemnity kind of dawned on people. And then the applause kind of thinned out.
It was really weird. Like I say, I've never heard one so badly observed. But I think the main thing, PSG scored, and not just scored, they played so well in that first 20 or so minutes that with the best will in the world, trying to get excited as fans about a team passing it around, about the opposition passing it around.
Right.
Because going behind's one thing, but if you feel like your team is in the game or creating chances or even laying a glove on them, putting tackles, there was nothing. PSG did so well in that first 20 or so minutes to just completely take the sting out of the game and dominate it in a way that Real Madrid never did, certainly not in the first leg, but even in the second leg.
Or PSG themselves didn't do when they turned up back on October the 1st in the league phase. And one of the differences to that performance was the fact that this one featured Ousmane Dembele, Tom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and as a consequence, a kind of perfect demonstration of how PSG have evolved since that game in October. With Dembele as the key man. He was left out in the October game for disciplinary reasons.
Because he turned up late for a
training session.
Right.
Yeah. And there had been reports of tensions with Luis Enrique, etc. And it was when Luis Enrique happened upon the idea of using him as the false nine, which is something he had tested previously, that suddenly everything clicked. And you even look at the way that PSG scored the opening goal. I mean, it comes off the back of a 26 pass.
So Arteta called it an individual moment in his post-game comments, which was...
Yeah, I mean, it's the literal opposite of an individual moment, except for the fact that, Dembele plays a central role. Right. And in very similar fashion to the goal that he scored at Anfield in the last 16, it's his run, his sprint away from the two Arsenal centre-backs into his own half, the pass from Nuno Mendes. And I think that's something that's kind of key to the way that Dembele kind of interprets the false nine role. We tend to think of it as something that causes tactical problems for opponents, and it does. But I think because Dembele is so fast and so energetic, and you can kind of, you can bring in his pressing here, which is also, central to the way that he plays, he almost doesn't give the players who are supposedly marking him time to react. And you looked at the sort of freeze frame of that goal. When he drops deep to collect the ball from Nuno Mendes, Saliba and Kivior are 30 yards further up the pitch because neither of them have dared to go with him. He turns around, Mendes' pass takes out about 4 or 5 Arsenal players, and Dembele's just got open grass to run into, plays it wide to Kvaratskhelia, gets the cutback, scores. Should
PSG have had a second goal, or at least a penalty when Kvaratskhelia was kind of embraced?
If the referee, who didn't have a good game, if the referee had given it, it wouldn't have been overturned. I think Arsenal probably got away with it on there. But then at the same time, Arsenal were on the receiving end of some deeply contestable decisions.
The fans were deeply unhappy, Charlie, with the home supporters were deeply unhappy with the referee.
I mean, I think it was kind of the perfect referee in that early spell for PSG, because what the Arsenal supporters would have wanted is, something to get your teeth into. And even if that's just a tackle that wins the ball back. Right. And it felt like he was being very niggly and pernickety on, and even on things like throw-ins, on make sure you're in the right position. And then, I mean, probably the worst officiating error came from the assistant later on when Nuno Mendes just kind of falls to the ground and Saka is furious and gets booked for kicking the ball away.
Well, he kicked the ball away.
Yeah, I mean, and you don't see Saka, he's not someone who's known for kind of losses of temper.
No.
I think he and everyone was kind of a bit mystified by that one.
Devil's advocate, the Nuno Mendes one was a terrible decision, clearly just took a tumble. But I think Arsenal may have shaded the refereeing decisions that first up. For me, the Kvaratskhelia one was definitely a penalty. He's gone inside him. He's essentially half rugby tackled. I think that's, for me, stunned that the VAR didn't overturn that. And then you had Timber avoiding a yellow card for 3 fouls on...
Yeah, after the referee just warned him as well.
Yeah, so a couple of decisions in the context of how the game was going gave Arsenal this feeling of injustice. But I don't think it was entirely justified. I think the referee was bad on both sides, I think you could fairly argue.
To be honest, they kind of needed that sort of sense of injustice, the players, the fans, to wake up a little bit, because it was PSG did so well to make it so sterile that I feel like it was some of it might even have been kind of confected rage of and I do what Arsenal, I mean, that first goal, I think going into the game, the big fear Arsenal fans would have had is Thomas Partey suspended.
Yeah.
Is there going to be a big hole in the middle of the park?
Oh, yeah.
And sure enough, 4 minutes in, there very much was. And Dembele sauntered into this space. And bear in mind, Arteta's obsession has been making Arsenal the best out of possession team they can be. That's their superpower. That's where they excel. Obviously, without Partey, forced them to change lots of things. It meant Rice had to drop back. Marino also had to drop back. And then they had to put Trossard up front. And that was a huge loss for them. Not having Partey was also a huge miss because they didn't really have someone who could take the ball deep in the way that the PSG midfielders could do, control the ball, turn, get things going. And I think Arteta talked obliquely. He wouldn't expand, but he said, there was something wrong in the first 20 minutes. We changed it and then we're a lot better.
Yeah.
I think what they did, they made it a much more physical, scrappy kind of game because that's the game they had to play without Thomas Partey and with Rice and Marino in there.
What did you think of Odegaard's performance?
He was bad. I mean, he was anonymous. I felt almost sorry for him,
How much do PSG deserve credit for, or Vitinha in particular deserve credit for that?
They do, but I think because it's not so isolated, maybe it feels like less of an achievement. If they'd kept Odegaard a year, 2 years ago quiet, then I think you'd be saying that. I think the fact that this has become quite commonplace, he just doesn't look right. He had this surgery earlier in the season. He looks like he might need some follow-up work, or maybe just needs a rest. He also had a kid earlier this season. I mean, he just looks tired and a bit weak. And he's kind of become the guy for a lot of the fan base. There's often a sort of lightning rod and sort of whatever they do, every misplaced pass, they get sort of shouted at.
Granit Xhaka.
Xhaka was it for a bit. Martinelli was it a bit earlier this season. And I think Odegaard's become that guy. From being the untouchable captain, he's become a bit the lightning rod.
Colin Miller with a stat here. Paris Saint-Germain have won more games against Premier League teams this year than Ipswich Town, Leicester City and Southampton put together.
Yeah, I think it was the seventh game they've played this season against
Premier League
English
sides?
opposition, and they've won 4, lost 3.
Right. And the victory's coming. I mean, the Villa away game being the exception. The Villa's the victory's coming after the turn of the year. So 1-0 up, and it was only 1-0, which I think would be regarded as a positive note for Arsenal. Any other bits of good news or reasons for optimism ahead of the trip to Paris next week?
Well, Partey's back.
Partey's back.
I mean that's a big thing. I mean, it's fair to say as well, Arsenal, you looked at their bench and I saw someone saying, is this the worst bench ever in a Champions League semi-final?
Who was on it?
I mean, there are 4 players on it who I'd imagine the vast majority of our listeners would never have heard of. Fair play to you if you've heard of any of Tommy Setford, Nathan Butler or Diaghi, Jack Henry Francis or Ishmael Kabaya.
Are these regions?
Then there's Neto, sub-keeper, and then 3 players who have zero future at the club, Tierney, Zinchenko, Sterling. The 2 vaguely usable players were Ben White, who's half fit, and Ethan Nwaneri, who's just turned 18. I mean, they are in the midst of an injury crisis. And obviously they've got used to it. So it's kind of like whatever. And they beat Real Madrid. But they had no subs, basically. And I think that's another thing with the thing about the atmosphere. There were 2 other factors in the second half. One was getting a goal disallowed by VAR like that. You'd be far better off just not scoring at all.
Right.
It kind of has the effect of...
So that had the kind of similar dampening effect that the goal from Paris Saint-Germain had.
Yeah. It feels to me like missing a penalty. It's that kind of vibe, and you've kind of had... Or maybe worse. And even and this is a sort of subtle thing, but for seasoned kind of paranoid VAR people, which is kind of every fan, generally you can in the Premier League, you're safe to celebrate once they start showing replays, because that's the point at which they're like, it's been cleared. They were showing replays. So I think everyone who has that kind of built-in knowledge was kind of like, oh, we're free to celebrate. The goal is going to be given. Then it wasn't. So that felt like... a missed pen or you'd conceded, a real kick in the teeth. And then the fact there were no subs to bring on, because that can often give fans a bit of a lift of 60 minutes, we're chucking on a couple of attackers. There was none of that, and it meant the kind of pattern of the game didn't really change as much as it might have done.
Some of Arsenal's performances away this season have been pretty amazing. 7-1 in Eindhoven, different calibre of opposition perhaps. A 5-1 victory in Lisbon, the game away at the Bernabeu, not least. So what do you think? Jack, Tom?
Well, I mean, PSG are in the driving seat. There were concerns after Dembele went off with 20 minutes to go because he'd felt something in his hamstring. And we know, particularly from his time at Barcelona, that he has had muscular problems during his career. That hasn't really been the case since he joined Paris.
Is he in doubt, do you think, for
Well,
second leg?
the latest news is that it's looking better than people had feared. He didn't actually undergo a scan yesterday because he was feeling much better, and that's a positive sign. But there is a fear that this, whatever it was he felt, is a sign that he needs to take things easy. Obviously, it helps that PSG have already won the league, and not only that, but they've now lost the opportunity to complete the season unbeaten in Ligue 1. So Luis Enrique will probably put out a complete second-string 11 against Strasbourg this weekend. But nevertheless, I think there's a worry that Dembele might be kind of, on the fringes of the red zone on the injury front. So I suspect he probably will start in Paris, but I think there is, he is going to be handled cautiously.
Okay.
Can I just ask you, Tom, what's your sense on kind of the atmosphere? Just because I feel like sometimes being at home with this sort of slender advantage in a huge game can be a bit of a double-edged sword, or certainly that would be my sense at some grounds, maybe like the Emirates. I could imagine it getting actually quite tense if, say, it remains 1-0, or so 0-0 on the night, but 1-0 on aggregate as it goes on. What do you think that will happen in Paris, or will they just keep on sort of in the way that they were at the Emirates the other night?
Yeah, I don't feel like... I'm trying to think about the kind of the key home games that PSG have played in the Champions League this season. I can't remember, feeling a stadium kind of consumed by tension. You go back to the Manchester City game at the end of January, which was the game that transformed PSG's season.
Right.
They absolutely batter City first half, full 2-0 down. That is exactly the kind of moment where tension ordinarily would creep in. But I don't think it really did. And PSG managed to turn things around. I think it's also worth pointing out that PSG fans, in particular, the ultras, very noisy, very colourful. It's a different kind of fandom. It's, choreographed, you might say slightly artificial if you're being cynical about it. They just make noise, they bang their drums, they sing, they let their flares off, regardless of what's happening on the pitch. Whereas in an English stadium, and I think you saw this with Arsenal this week,
They react more to what they see.
you're reacting to what happens. And, the Arsenal fan base is a uniquely neurotic one.
Right.
And you felt that, during the game. Whereas I think the fact that the approach of PSG fans is we're just going to make noise, we're going to sing and dance. You don't really feel that in the same way.
I understand. I'm just going to throw two more potential reasons for positivity for Arsenal supporters. One is the fact that if there's any club with a history of throwing away first leg leads in the Champions League, and the other is that this performance, this 1-0 win, was essentially ensured by a magnificent performance by Gigi Donnarumma. 5 saves he made, a couple of them were absolute worldies. He's been in great form this season, particularly in the Champions League, but there have been games when he hasn't impressed as much in his past, and I'm sure we could all pick out examples. So maybe, if he's not on his game quite the way that he was on Tuesday, that will be an advantage for a partied up Arsenal.
Well, and the disallowed goal is a glimpse into his vulnerability. It's basically a clip into the box, and he's nowhere near getting to Marino for the header.
Yeah. Indeed.
Yeah, I think, maybe Arsenal's best tactic is to win a lot of free kicks and win a lot of corners because...
And don't start offside this time, Pat.
Right. Well, and I know it's become a thing of, dead ball FC, but genuinely, that does look like their best option at the moment because there's no... Arsenal have been a very, very good team for 2 or 3 years now, but the fluency that we saw maybe 2 seasons ago isn't really there anymore. It's kind of more of a stop-start moments team, like going back to Odegaard, like the kind of Odegaard, Saka, used to be Ben White triangle. Well, that was such an area of strength for Arsenal. And in Tuesday's match, there was really no interplay, even on that side, which is kind of their key area. So, get Declan swinging the balls in and see what happens.
We'll be previewing that game and the Inter-Barca match with Julian Laurent and Pol. And James Horncastle should be back with us.
Wow.
From his sabbatical. Talking about potential new Messis earlier on. Funnily enough, the old one was in action this midweek. The CONCACAF, as was Cristiano Ronaldo. So Messi, of course, plays for Inter, rather than against, but Inter Miami. And they were in the CONCACAF Champions League semi-finals. They got beat 3-1 Wednesday by Vancouver. Folk in the know say this is a huge upset. Vancouver were widely tipped to be bottom of whatever competition they were taking part in this season. Big problems on and off the field, but there they are in the final. They're going to be taking on either Tigres or Cruz Azul, both of Mexico's Liga MX, in the final on June the 1st. Exciting. How's about Cristiano Ronaldo? He was in the Asian Champions League. The semi-finals and finals of which, or final of which, are all being held in Saudi. Semi-finals featuring 3 Saudi teams, but only one of them made it through to the final. The final is going to be held this Saturday. If you fancy this, Saturday, I think 5:30 in the afternoon, you can see Kawasaki Frontale of the J-League, who knocked out Cristiano Ronaldo's Al Nassr. Cristiano Ronaldo with a big chance to equalise at the death. It was 3-2 to Kawasaki Frontale. And I think you were viewing a scene of Cristiano mumbling to himself at the centre circle post the final whistle.
Yeah, sort of curious moment of solitude in the centre circle on his own, sort of gesticulating and kind of doing like leg movements and arm movements as if he's reliving, match actions in his head and trying to figure out,
that chance
why.
he missed.
Yeah.
The other semi-final saw Al Ahly beat Al Hilal with goals from, excitingly, Roberto Firmino and Ivan Toney, who got an assist from Riyad Mahrez for his. Anyway, so you can see how that team does against Kawasaki Frontale. 5:30 on Saturday. Jorge Jesus, Jack, is the Al Hilal boss, beaten here. Is he now the front runner for what everyone thought was going to be Carlo Ancelotti's gig with Brazil?
Yeah, it appears to be. This is it's an ever-changing landscape, as tends to be the case with Brazil. So yeah, Brazil thought they had finally landed Ancelotti. They've been having talks with him for the last few months. There appears to be a stumbling block.
No way.
I hope no one had written a kind of 2,000 word article.
I was just opening my Word document yesterday morning when I happily checked the news first. Okay. Brazil have been pursuing Ancelotti. I've been talking about this for like 2 years, but they finally thought they were going to get it over the line now because it seems he's on his way out of Madrid. But he has 1 extra year of contract with Madrid, and from what reports suggest, he is hoping that they kind of say, we don't want you anymore and we'll pay off that final year. Right. Whereas they're saying, well, no, if you want to go to Brazil, then you're going to forfeit that amount of money. Anyway, it could still turn out to happen. But for the minute, Jorge Jesus, who obviously has had a long career in European football prior to being in the Middle East, but also most significantly had a very successful spell in Brazil for Flamengo, right? Where he kind of is interesting character. Like he's quite spiky. Yeah,
he had that big Tim Sherwood fallout.
That's right.
What was that?
It was Spurs played Benfica in the 2014 Europa League, and it was when Sherwood was just mouthing off, like he was kicking off after every game. He was really wound up, right? And him and Jesus had to almost be separated on the touchline. I mean, it was proper verbals that almost spilled over. And then Sherwood, rather than backing down in the press conference, really sort of doubled down on it and talked about him having no class and this sort of thing. But I mean, I think as well, because Jesus maybe said something like, this guy has like zero tactics. He does not know what he's doing, which is absolutely true and fair. So it was kind of this this kind of perfect storm of these two managerial titans coming head to head.
Tom, what do you make of Premier League match day 35?
Looking forward to it as ever. Feel like we have probably got to the point in the season where results start to get a little bit peculiar because some teams have got a lot to play for and some teams have got nothing to play for.
So at last count, I think 5 teams have got something to play for and 15 have got absolutely nothing.
I'm sure there's more than 5.
I call these the Shaun Maloney weeks. From when Shaun Maloney turned into Garrincha for Wigan when they were pursuing survival and suddenly just became an absolute storming force.
Killed United's title hopes, didn't he, effectively, in 2012?
You look at, Arsenal, Bournemouth. Arsenal will have at least one eye, if not both eyes, on Paris in midweek. Bournemouth need points, albeit their European dream is fading rapidly. Chelsea-Liverpool, it's the Super Sunday game on Sunday, but is it,
Good time to play Liverpool, potentially.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I suggest 5 teams because there are 3 places in the top 5 still to play for beyond Liverpool and Arsenal, and there's 5 teams battling for those 3 spots.
yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, I mean, you've got other sides like Man United,
You've got the
West
Conference
Ham,
League
Spurs
equation.
trying not to finish 17th, arguably. But of those 5 teams battling for Champions League spots, City play Wolves on Friday night. Both teams in tremendous runs of form. Villa, who are 7th, currently 3 points off the top 5. They host Fulham, who are only a place behind them, Saturday lunchtime. Newcastle, who are 3rd right now, they're at Brighton, who they've already lost to twice this season. That's Sunday at 2 o'clock. Your Chelsea-Liverpool is at 4:30 in the Super Sunday slot. That game's supposedly part of Chelsea's tougher run-in, but maybe not now. And Forest, who actually could have shaken up the top 5 picture tonight, Thursday night, because they are at home to Brentford, will be playing again at Palace on Monday night.
I mean, could Arsenal still get dragged in? I mean, they are on a pretty ropey run of form. They basically draw every game, which maybe that'll be enough to keep them, but they're not that far. I mean, if Forest win tonight, Forest are 4 points behind them. Newcastle 5 behind. Maybe that's enough of buffer at this stage. But as Tom says, they are absolutely not focused on the league, and they've got Liverpool away and Newcastle to come in the next 2 games after Bournemouth.
Good news for Andy Jennings, who writes in saying, will I ever have a better chance of going along to the Emirates and not see Bournemouth lose? Or should I just stay in the pubs of Camden Market? Jack, Bournemouth at the Emirates? Strong views?
Not strong views. Yeah, good opportunity to win, though. I think, Bournemouth's season they're kind of pottering along. I don't think there's anything, they're realistically not going to claw their way into the European places necessarily. But yeah, it could be a good opportunity for a late season scalp. Why not?
Got Evan Nielsen as well available.
Yeah, because he had his red card
Yeah.
overturned.
And the good thing about the Champions League picture this weekend in particular is that all of the Champions League contenders have got slightly fiddly games. None of them are playing the bottom 3. None of them are playing West Ham or Tottenham or Manchester United. So I think it'll be a very interesting weekend from that perspective.
That has skewed things recently because a lot of teams either have nothing to play for or are focused on the Europa League or something. But yeah, like Newcastle away at Brighton, that's a tricky game.
How tricky is Man City Wolves? Wolves who've won 6 games in a row.
I mean, it is. I think City are in such good form themselves that at home you'd make them favourites. But Wolves are in a lovely position. They're in great form. They've got nothing to worry about. They can just go and play their natural game. I don't think they need to. I mean, they'll obviously have to make some allowances for playing City, but that should be I mean, Wolves are such an entertaining team to watch, so I think that should be good.
Excellent. As for the other matches, there's plenty of interest there if you dig a little. Leicester taking on Saints, for example. Can Saints move past the dread 11-point mark? Can Leicester score a goal at home for the first time in 2025? That's Saturday, 3 o'clock.
And this is we said this on the pod on Sunday/Monday, but this could be Southampton's last realistic chance to get a point. So this is it, lads.
It'd be annoying
no
if they equaled the record, wouldn't it?
No,
it would be.
That'd be quite
either
unsatisfying.
break it or just
yeah.
steer clear. But
Because it's sort of Derby's thing.
you can't have the 2 joint worst teams.
Yeah.
Come on.
I hear you, Tom. At the same time, Saturday, 3 o'clock, Everton host Ipswich in what is the penultimate game at Goodison Park. Arsenal-Bournemouth, aforementioned, is at 5:30 on Saturday. Sunday at 2, Brentford host Man United, and West Ham take on Tottenham in what is a derby in so many ways. The race not to be 17th derby, the Postecoglou manager under pressure derby, and also the fact that it is quite literally a derby.
I feel like that's the kind of game that, if it hasn't already, will be given a witty epithet by kickoff.
Right.
Kind of
Like
El
El Sacico
Crapico, El
type thing.
Sacico, etc. El underwhelming managerial, or however you want to phrase it.
I mean,
Right.
Kyle Walker recently said when he was at Spurs, this was a fiercer derby than the North London derby.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess, there's no point really previewing tonight because most will list it. But Spurs will have played their first leg of the Europa League, won't they? I mean,
Against Bodo Glimt. Man United, meanwhile, will have played their first leg away in Bilbao against Athletic after which Sunday they'll be in Brentford. They haven't won a Premier League game in 5 attempts. That's their worst run in 6 years. In fact, here's a stat. If you made a 17-team league table that didn't include the relegated teams, all the results, of course, against them, Man United would be bottom because, Jack, fully 41% of their points this season have come against the bottom 3. 41%!
Incredibly damning, isn't it?
That's a good
And
stat.
yet, they are 3 games away from the Champions League.
Wow. Quite a thought, isn't it?
Yeah, as are Spurs, who've been as bad in the league. It is kind of great. I mean, we've talked about it before. It could be 16th or 17th, having a sort of Champions League playoff.
Absolutely. Everton-Ipswich, penultimate game at Goodison Park. Toffees have only won 1 of their last 9 matches, but here's another stat that tickled me. This is going to be David Moyes' 1,167th game as a manager. In all that time, he's never, ever played Ipswich.
I mean, he nearly did because he joined Everton in 2002 and Ipswich got relegated. So they were in the same division as Ipswich, but they must have played them twice already because he joined in March or something. So he's been very near, but not quite.
I mean, I haven't gone back and checked, but I read that.
Oh, I'm sure it's true.
Everton, who have the 2 players who are at the top of the most shots without scoring table in the Premier League, if you're curious. Jesper Lindstrom, who's had 28, and Idrissa Gueye with 27.
Can we just quickly thank Hater Dylan / and Stephen Headley,
Right.
who got in touch the
Modi
plural form
operandi.
of modus operandi, which came up on
Right.
Monday's
I
pod.
wasn't here. I could have put my A-level Latin.
Would you have known that?
I would have done, yeah.
I believe that I said Modi. She might have got... I didn't want to be too kind of heavy-handed about it. But yeah, thanks to them for pointing that out.
It's nice to know that the totally community is on hand to
You'd think
plug
that,
these
you'd think
gaps
there
in
would
our
be a
knowledge.
good sort of Latin, totally good overlap there.
Can I point
yeah,
out that it's
big time.
Hater, that's H-E-I, it's not Hater Dylan. It's not like some
Yeah,
It's a linguistic hater, Dylan.
online keyboard
Dylan.
warrior.
I'm
yeah.
going to get.
Hater,
I'm going to
Notorious.
and Stephen Headley.
Troll.
Very nice indeed. We return Sunday night with our Premier League roundup. Do hope you'll be joining us for that. Many thanks as well to Pol Ballus for earlier on, to Charlie, to Tom, to Jack, to producer Charlie, and to you, listener. We'll be back on Sunday evening, Monday morning. Do hope you'll join us for that. The Totally Football Show podcast is available 3 times a week, bringing you all the football news you could reasonably be expected to care about. We've got views, we've got stats, we've got analysis, we've got some of the best football writers around, and the whole thing is absolutely free. So have a listen on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or all the usual places, by clicking on the link below.